On October 5, 1944, near Asselt in the Netherlands, 5 pilots from the 401st Squadron of the Royal Canadian Air Force circled high up, their Spitfire Mark 9 planes shining in the afternoon light. Squadron leader Smith noticed it first, a silver streak diving toward Nîmes at an incredible speed. Before we continue, show your support by subscribing and letting me know where you're watching from. It had no propeller and no familiar shape, just a dart of metal moving quicker than anything the Canadians had ever faced in battle. The Me-262 jet fighter turned sharply, its exhaust leaving faint trails against the purple sky. For 3 years, Allied intelligence had heard whispers about German jet development, but rumors were nothing like the real thing now screaming past at over 500 km/h. Smith got on his radio, calling Flight Lieutenant Davenport, Flight Lieutenant Everard, Flying Officer Mai, and Flying Officer Sinclair into their attack positions. What happened next was the first confirmed time in aviation history that a jet fighter was shot down by gunfire in air combat. More importantly, it was the first crack in what German propaganda had promised would be an unbeatable wonder weapon. The Messerschmitt 262 Schwalbe had just shown its deadly weakness. Within months, American P-51 Mustang pilots would turn that weakness into organized hunting missions that would make the world's first operational jet fighter almost useless, despite its groundbreaking technology. The mental impact of that first jet encounter spread through Allied fighter squadrons all over Europe. Pilots who saw the Me-262s knew right away that air combat had changed for good. Captain Chuck Yeager of the 357th Fighter Group, based at RAF Leiston, listened to the intelligence reports with growing worry. The German jet could fly at 540 mph in level flight, while the P-51 Mustang's top speed was 437 mph. In a straight chase, the Me-262 was simply impossible to catch. The numbers were harsh and could not be denied. If the Luftwaffe sent out these jets in large numbers with enough fuel and skilled pilots, the strategic bombing missions that were crushing German industry could suffer terrible losses. B-17, flying fortresses, flying slowly through anti-aircraft fire at 180 mph, would be easy targets for pilots in planes that could attack from any direction and get away before escort fighters could even react. For the first time since gaining control of the skies over Europe, Allied commanders faced the chance of losing it. But the Me-262's revolutionary design had weaknesses that came from the basic nature of jet engines in 1944. The Junkers Jumo 004 axial flow turbojet engines were a giant leap forward in airplane technology, yet they were also basic and unreliable. Each engine produced about 180 pounds of thrust at 8,700 revolutions per minute, using up J2 synthetic fuel made from brown coal at double the rate of regular fighters. The turbine blades, made from a chromoly alloy, because Germany didn't have enough heat-resistant nickel and chromium, operated at temperatures that made them stretch and weaken quickly. In combat situations, the Jumo 004B engines needed a major checkup after about 10 hours of use, with a full engine replacement usually needed after 25 hours of service. This meant that after just 3 or 4 combat flights, Me-262s needed new engines, creating huge supply problems that German ground crews could never completely fix. The engine's throttle response created immediate problems in a fight. Unlike piston engines that reacted almost instantly, the Jumo 004 had a serious delay. Pushing the throttle forward too fast sent too much fuel into the combustion chambers before the airflow could catch up, causing temperatures to soar and the turbine blades to overheat. Pilots had to handle their throttles very carefully, making small adjustments and waiting for the engines to catch up. In a battle where split-second timing often meant life or death, this slow response turned the world's fastest fighter into a weak target at key moments. The Me-262's takeoff and landing routines made these engine problems even worse, leading to tactical disasters. With a wing loading of 294 kilos per square meter, much higher than any other fighter at the time, the jet needed takeoff speeds over 110 knots and landing approaches at similar speeds. During the crucial acceleration part, after releasing the brakes, the Me-262 took nearly 30 seconds to get to flying speed, rushing down the runway while its engines struggled to build up thrust. For those 30 seconds, the plane was basically helpless, moving in a straight line at a predictable speed with no way to turn or dodge. Any Allied fighter that found an Me-262 during takeoff had an almost still target that couldn't get away, couldn't speed up fast enough, and could hardly fight back. Landing approaches created the same weaknesses. As Me-262 pilots came down toward their airfields with fuel gauges near empty after 60 to 90-minute missions, they had to slow down to landing speeds while putting down flaps and gear, again becoming predictable targets, flying straight and level. The groundbreaking jet engines that made the Me-262 unbeatable at high altitudes became like anchors during these low-speed moments. Intelligence officers at 8th Air Force Headquarters in England studied the issue carefully through the late summer and early fall of 1944. Photo recon missions found Me-262 bases at Achmer, Rheine, Lechfeld, and Munich-Riem. Looking at gun camera film from the few jet encounters showed the plane's high-speed strengths, but also its low-speed weaknesses. Allied intelligence knew that Me-262 pilots, after using most of their fuel during high-speed attacks, had to go back to these specific airfields. They couldn't go to other bases because the special J-2 fuel needed by the jet engines was only at certain locations. This location limit created a chance. If Mustang fighters could wait around near known jet bases, they could ambush Me-262s when they were most open to attack. The tactic took patience, fuel, and pilots ready to fly straight into some of the most heavily defended areas in Germany, but it was the only sure way for propeller planes to fight jets on somewhat even terms. The Luftwaffe saw this weakness right after the first jets were lost. Commanders set up long lines of anti-aircraft guns along the approach paths to Me-262 bases, placing 88mm guns, 37mm automatic cannons, and quad 20mm systems to create a wall of fire that any attacking fighter had to fly through. They assigned their best piston engine fighters, the Focke-Wulf FW-190D and the rare Te-152H, to fly cover during jet takeoffs and landings. Flight times were mixed up when possible to stop Allied fighters from guessing launch times. Some bases used fake planes to draw attackers into anti-aircraft traps. The Autobahn near several jet bases was turned into emergency landing strips with hidden parking spots in nearby woods, letting Me-262s operate from places Allied intelligence hadn't found. Despite these defenses, the main tactical problem couldn't be solved. Me-262s had to take off and land, and during those times they were defenseless no matter how many guns protected them. Lieutenant Urban Drew of the 361st Fighter Group became very familiar with the Me-262 threat during missions over Germany in early October 1944. The 21-year-old pilot from Detroit had seen a jet on a prior flight and sent in detailed reports about what it could do. On October 7th, Drew was grounded and in trouble for doing an unauthorized victory roll after a successful mission. His punishment was forgotten when intelligence reported a large number of Me-262s at Achmer Airdrome in northwestern Germany. Drew's past jet encounter made him the clear choice to lead a fighter sweep against the base. He briefed his flight group thoroughly, stressing that success depended on surprise, aggression, and being willing to fly right through German anti-aircraft defenses. His wingman, Second Lieutenant Robert McCandless, would stick with him no matter what. Drew's P-51 Mustang, coded E-2D and named Detroit Miss, took off from RAF Little Walden with full fuel tanks, giving him nearly 4 hours of flight time. The weather over Germany that afternoon had scattered clouds and good visibility, perfect for spotting planes against the ground. Drew led his flight toward Akmer at 15,000 feet, always looking for jet trails or the glint of sun on metal. As they got near the known jet base, he saw them. Two Me-262s were on the runway, engines already on, getting ready for takeoff. Drew pushed his throttle all the way forward and went into a dive, gaining speed and losing height fast. The Me-262s started their takeoff run just as Drew's Mustang shot past 400 mph in the dive. The lead jet, flown by Oberfeldwebel Heinz Arnold, had reached maybe 80 mm when Drew started shooting from 800 yards away, his .650 caliber machine guns aimed at the speeding target. Tracers hit the runway and then found the Me-262's right engine. Arnold's jet jerked as the engine blew apart, but he was already going too fast to stop. The damaged Me-262 struggled into the air on one engine, unable to stay up or speed up. Drew got closer to 400 yards and fired again, this time hitting the cockpit. Arnold's jet flipped over and crashed into the trees next to the runway, blowing up on impact. The second Me-262, flown by Lieutenant Gerhard Kobert, had seen Arnold's plane get destroyed and tried to stop his own takeoff, but the jet's slow throttle and high speed made it impossible to slow down quickly. Kobert's plane was still moving fast when Drew pulled up from his first attack and immediately got into position for a second run. McCandless shouted warnings about anti-aircraft fire as German gunners got their aim. Shells from 88 mm guns burst around the attacking Mustangs in black puffs. Drew ignored the fire and dove again, shooting a long burst into Kobert's Me-262 as it tried to turn off the runway. Hits flashed along the body and both engines. The jet slowed, then burst into flames as its fuel tanks caught fire. Kobert got out of the burning plane, but his aircraft was destroyed. In less than 2 minutes, Drew had destroyed two of Germany's most advanced fighters using tactics that would become the standard for Allied pilots. The fight proved that being technologically better meant nothing during key flight moments, and that being aggressive with perfect timing could defeat the Me-262 threat. Drew's gun camera broke during the attack, so there was no photo proof of his victories. His only witness, McCandless, was hit by anti-aircraft fire as they escaped from Akmer and was shot down, becoming a prisoner of war before he could confirm Drew's story. Without gun camera film or witness reports, 8th Air Force Headquarters at first denied Drew credit for his victories, a huge letdown after one of the war's most important tactical wins. Drew wouldn't get official credit until 1983, almost 40 years later, when German Luftwaffe records were compared with American records. Luftwaffe ace Georg Peter Eder, who was supposed to lead the Me-262 group that day, but whose plane had mechanical trouble, confirmed that he saw a yellow-nosed P-51 dive on the Me-262s and destroy both jets. Eder couldn't read the name Detroit Miss painted on the Mustang's nose from where he stood, but his statement was enough. The United States Air Force gave Drew the Air Force Cross on May 12, 1983, presented by the Secretary of the Air Force, Vern Orr. Drew and his wife were flown from Johannesburg, South Africa, for the ceremony on a C-141 Starlifter. He is still the first and only Allied pilot to shoot down 2 jet aircraft in one mission while flying a propeller-driven fighter. That same day, October 7, 1944, Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zemke of the 479th Fighter Group might have scored another Me-262 victory, though it's not certain. Zemke, one of the 8th Air Force's most experienced fighter leaders, attacked what he thought was a Bf-109 during a mission over Germany. His gun camera film was unclear, showing a plane that could have been either a Messerschmitt 109 or an Me-262. After the war, analysis suggested it was probably a jet, but the victory was never officially confirmed. What was more important than the individual victory claims was the pattern that was forming. American fighter pilots were learning that Me-262s, despite their incredible speed, could be beaten with new tactics. The trick was to not fight the jets where they were strongest, at high altitude and high speed, and instead force fights during weaker moments when their speed advantage was gone. Chuck Yeager met his first Me-262 exactly 1 month later, on November 6, 1944, while leading a bomber escort mission near Akmer, Germany. Yeager's P-51, named Glamorous Glenn III after his wife Glenna, was flying at patrol height when he saw Me-262s trying to attack the bomber formation. The jets made their attack runs with their usual tactics, diving through the bomber group at amazing speed, shooting for a moment, then using their speed advantage to climb back up before escort fighters could do anything. Yeager watched the jets vanish into the clouds, seeming to get away clean. The standard rule was that chasing Me-262s was pointless, but Yeager took a calculated risk. Those jets had to land somewhere, and they had to land soon because their fuel didn't last long. He left the bomber formation and went down through the clouds, coming out at a lower altitude near Akmer Airfield. Below him, Yeager saw a single Me-262 in the landing pattern, with its gear and flaps down, speed slowed to maybe 150 mph as it lined up for its final approach. The German pilot, busy with his landing, apparently didn't see the Mustang diving on him from above and behind. Yeager pushed his throttle all the way forward and set his plane for the fastest possible dive. The P-51 picked up speed quickly as it went down. Yeager, using gravity to increase his speed to over 450 mph, closed into 400 yards and opened fire, guiding his tracers onto the Me-262's wings. Hits sparked along the jet's left wing root and body. The Me-262 pilot, likely hurt or killed by the first shots, made no move to escape. Yeager kept shooting as he got to point-blank range, pouring bullets into the jet's engines and cockpit. The Me-262's left wing bent upward. The jet rolled over and crashed into the woods a few hundred feet short of the runway, exploding in a ball of orange fire. Yeager had no time to celebrate. Akmer's defensive guns started firing right away, with 88mm shells bursting around his Mustang as he flew across the airfield at high speed and treetop level. His only choice was to fly straight down the runway, using his speed to get away before the gun crews could re-aim. Tracers flew across the field from both sides. Some shots fired from one side of the runway actually hit gun positions on the other side in the confusion. Yeager kept his P-51 low and fast, cleared the far end of the airfield and pulled up sharply, diving for the safety of a nearby valley. He had survived one of the most dangerous situations in air combat, attacking an enemy airfield in daylight at low altitude, but he had also proved that Me-262s could be hunted and destroyed. Yeager later described the fight with his usual modesty. "First time I ever saw a jet, I shot it down. Not very sportsmanlike, but what the hell?" Through late 1944 and into 1945, American fighter pilots improved their anti-jet tactics based on hard-won experience and carefully studied gun camera footage. The P-51 Mustang turned out to be perfect for the job because of its amazing range and flight time. A Mustang with full internal fuel and 2 wing drop tanks could stay in the air for more than 7 hours, giving pilots the ability to wait near known jet bases for long periods. When jets showed up, Mustang pilots used their height advantage to dive on them, trading altitude for speed. In a dive, a P-51 could briefly reach or even go past 500 mph, enough to catch Me-262s during their weakest moments. Timing was everything. Attacking jets during their takeoff run meant spotting them early and getting in position before they reached flying speed. Catching them on their landing approach required the patience to wait for the perfect moment when the jet was stuck on its path with gear and flaps down. Fighter pilots gained a deep knowledge of Me-262 operational habits through constant watching and intelligence work. They learned that jets usually flew in the morning and late afternoon when visibility was good, but the sun's angle made it hard for defenders to see them. They saw that Me-262s often flew in pairs or small groups, rarely by themselves, which meant that destroying one jet often created chances to attack others. They understood that German pilots, limited by fuel, couldn't cancel a landing approach and go around for another try. Once an Me-262 started its landing with low fuel, the pilot had no choice but to keep going, no matter the dangers. This mental factor gave attacking Mustang pilots a key advantage. The jet pilot knew he was in danger, but couldn't stop. The Mustang pilot could push his attack, sure that his target wouldn't suddenly speed up and get away. The Luftwaffe's defenses became more advanced in reaction to these tactics, but the core problems were still unsolvable. Anti-aircraft alleys got thicker, with some approach paths defended by more than 100 guns of different sizes. Fighter cover grew, with FW-190D and TA-152H pilots ordered specifically to attack Allied fighters near jet bases, no matter the situation. Me-262 pilots were told to change their approach patterns, making random turns and altitude changes to make it harder to intercept them. Some bases used smoke, generators to hide the field during landing operations. Despite these efforts, the basic math couldn't be changed. Me-262s needed specific bases with special fuel and could only stay in the air for a limited time. Allied fighters could flood the areas around jet bases, making some kind of fight almost certain. February 25, 1945, gave one of the most powerful examples of these tactics when Mustangs of the 55th Fighter Group surprised a whole squadron of Me-262s at Giebelstadt Airfield during takeoff. The attack was timed perfectly, with P-51s showing up just as several jets started their takeoff runs. In the confusion that followed, American pilots destroyed 6 Me-262s on the ground or during takeoff, with several more damaged. The losses were a large portion of the operational jets that unit had. German records show the Me-262s belonged to the unlucky KGJ-54, a bomber unit that had been given jets but whose pilots didn't have enough fighter training. The 55th Fighter Group's attack showed that focused fighter sweeps against jet bases during known operational times could get amazing results, though it was very risky. Several Mustangs were damaged by defensive fire during the fight, and the success of the tactic depended on complete surprise. The psychological toll of these defeats on German jet pilots was deep and grew over time. Me-262 pilots were top aviators, carefully chosen and highly trained, often veterans with a lot of combat experience. They knew their technological advantages and at first went on missions with well-deserved confidence in their planes. But repeated losses during takeoff and landing created a sense of fear around these key moments. Pilots knew that every departure and return came with a big risk of ambush. The knowledge that Allied fighters might be waiting, that there was no way to escape once they started landing, and that the fuel gauges showed empty tanks created mental pressure that hurt their performance and choices. The March 18, 1945, raid on Berlin showed both the Me-262's potential and its final failure to change the war's outcome. A total of 1,121 Allied bombers, escorted by 632 fighters, attacked the German capital in what would be the last major air battle over Germany. Luftwaffe commanders gathered 37 Me-262s from Jagdgeschwader 7 for a coordinated attack on the bomber formations, the largest jet force ever sent on a single mission. Oberleutnant Günther Wegmann led his squadron in a loose formation toward the incoming bombers, and he and his wingmen fired R-4M unguided rockets for the first time in combat. The 50mm rockets, carried in underwing racks of 12 per plane, were meant to explode near bombers, destroying them with the blast and shrapnel without needing perfect aim. Wegmann's rockets tore into a formation of B-17s, and watchers reported seeing multiple bombers hit and falling. Other Me-262 pilots pushed attacks with regular 30mm cannons, their speed letting them make several passes before Escorts could react well. The fight was short but fierce. German pilots claimed 12 bombers and 1 fighter shot down, though United States records show 8 heavy bombers were actually lost, along with 3 Me-262s destroyed in air combat. The difference between claims and actual losses showed the common wartime habit of overclaiming because of the confusion of battle. Even if the German claims were true, the jets destroyed less than 1% of the attacking force, while the huge bomber formation reached its target and dropped its bombs. The strategic bombing campaign went on as before. 5 American fighter pilots didn't come back, and dozens of bomber crew members were killed or became prisoners. But the mission was seen as a success, a complete success, by Allied planners. Adolf Galland, Germany's former general of fighters who had been fired after arguments with Hermann Göring over fighter strategy, created Jagdverband 44 in February 1945. It was an elite Me-262 unit led by and made up of Germany's most experienced aces. The list of pilots was like a who's who of Luftwaffe legends, pilots with hundreds of victories combined. The unit was given first priority for planes, fuel, and support, being Germany's last try to use jet fighters in significant numbers under the best conditions. Galland himself flew combat missions, getting victories with both cannons and the R-4M rockets. Other pilots reported success against bombers and even against escorting fighters when the situation was right for jet tactics. Yet, Jagdverband 44's operational life was counted in weeks, not months. Allied bombing of bases forced them to move constantly. Fuel shortages kept planes on the ground for days. Engine reliability issues meant that half the assigned jets were usually not working, waiting for spare parts or engine changes. The hard numbers of Me-262 operations showed the difference between what they could do in theory and what they did in practice. German records show that about 1,433 Me-262s were built during the war. Of those, only around 200 to 300 ever saw combat. The rest were destroyed on the ground by bombing, lost during training, or couldn't be flown because of maintenance issues. At no time did the Luftwaffe have more than 50 Me-262s ready for action at the same time, and the usual daily number was closer to 25 planes. This force was up against an Allied fighter strength of over 5,000 aircraft at any given time, plus thousands more bombers. The numbers were impossible to beat. Me-262 pilots claimed about 542 Allied aircraft destroyed in air-to-air combat, though checking these claims shows the usual wartime overclaiming by all sides. After the war, American researchers suggested that actual losses to Me-262s were much lower. Allied forces destroyed Me-262s at rates faster than Germany could produce and train them. American records give P-51 Mustangs credit for 92.5 confirmed Me-262 shootdowns, though this number includes planes destroyed on the ground and during takeoff or landing, not just in air-to-air fights. The 357th Fighter Group, Chuck Yeager's unit, led American forces with 18.5 confirmed jet kills. The 55th Fighter Group claimed 17, while the 78th and 339th Fighter Groups were each credited with 15. British forces, especially those flying Hawker Tempests and Spitfires, claimed another dozen jet kills. The combined effect was that Me-262 losses were greater than replacements, and the operational force kept shrinking even though production continued until Germany's surrender. German ace pilots who flew the Me-262 gave mixed reviews of its effectiveness in interviews after the war. Georg Peter Eder, who had 12 kills in the jet, including 9 P-51s, admitted that the plane's speed made high-altitude bomber attacks relatively safe, but that Allied counter-tactics increasingly canceled out this advantage. Walter Dahl, credited with 11 jet victories, including 6 Mustangs, stressed that fuel limits and engine reliability problems limited their tactical choices so much that the jet's theoretical superiority became mostly meaningless in real operations. Heinrich Baer, with 16 Me-262 kills out of his total of 240 career victories, said simply that the jet came too late and in too few numbers to make a difference. Franz Schall, the type's likely top ace with 17 kills, including 6 four-engine bombers and 10 P-51s, was killed in action in April 1945. But his earlier reports highlighted the plane's inability to effectively fight maneuvering fighters because of its high approach speeds and wide turning circle. The tactical lessons learned from Me-262 operations shaped post-war jet fighter development around the world. Allied engineers studied captured jets closely, testing them at facilities in the United States and Britain. They confirmed that the basic design was good, but that engine technology was still the main limiting factor. Early American jets like the Lockheed P-80 and the Republic F-84, and Soviet designs like the MiG-15 included fixes for problems found in the Me-262, longer engine life, better throttle response, improved fuel efficiency, and stronger airframes fixed the specific weaknesses that Allied fighters had taken advantage of. American pilots who successfully fought Me-262s became known experts in the fighter community, their combat reports studied carefully by intelligence officers and training instructors. Besides Urban Drew and Chuck Yeager, dozens of other pilots got jet kills through the steady use of tactics developed through tough experience. These pilots had things in common, including great eyesight, precise shooting skills, aggressive attitudes, and a willingness to take risks that more careful pilots avoided. Attacking jet bases through heavy anti-aircraft fire took a courage that was almost reckless. Yet these pilots flew such missions again and again because they knew how important it was to stop the jet threat. The human price of these fights was high on both sides. American fighter pilots killed during attacks on jet bases died far from home, often in fiery crashes after being hit by anti-aircraft fire. Their bodies were sometimes never found in the crash sites in Germany. German Me-262 pilots, the best of the Luftwaffe, were assets that couldn't be replaced, lost at rates that Germany's shrinking training program couldn't keep up with. Each dead or captured German jet pilot represented hundreds of hours of training, millions of Reichsmarks in cost, and tactical experience gained over years of combat. The stress led to mistakes in judgment, accidents during takeoff and landing, and a decline in combat effectiveness, even among experienced pilots. The support system for Me-262 operations fell apart steadily through early 1945. As Allied armies moved into Germany and strategic bombing got worse, specialized jet fuel became harder and harder to find as refineries were bombed or captured. Replacement engines, already in short supply because of production problems, became unavailable when factories were destroyed or taken by advancing armies. Spare parts for planes and systems vanished from the supply lines. Trained maintenance crews were killed in bombing raids or moved to infantry units as Germany became desperate for soldiers. Airfields themselves came under direct ground attack as the front lines moved east. By April 1945, Me-262 units were flying from sections of the Autobahn or makeshift strips, hiding planes in the woods, and working with few supplies under constant threat of air attack. The final weeks of Me-262 operations in April and early May 1945 were marked by scattered missions flown by separate units acting on their own as Central Command fell apart. Individual pilots flew missions when fuel was available, often attacking whatever targets they could find rather than carrying out planned operations. Some pilots chose to fly their jets to Allied-held areas and surrender instead of continuing a hopeless fight. Others flew final missions knowing they couldn't return because of fuel shortages or their airfield being captured. A few, including members of Jagdverband 44, flew in combat until literally the final days of the war, getting kills even as Germany's military structure completely collapsed. Post-war analysis by American and British aviation experts agreed that the Me-262 was a revolutionary technological achievement that came too late to change the war's outcome. Even if Hitler hadn't delayed production by demanding bomber versions, even if the engines had been more reliable, even if more were made, the basic strategic situation made the jet's impact small. In 1944, Germany lacked fuel, lacked trained pilots, lacked the air superiority needed for safe operations, and faced a huge numerical disadvantage against Allied air forces. The Me-262 couldn't solve these problems, no matter its performance advantages. The legacy of the Me-262 versus Mustang fights went far beyond World War II, influencing air combat doctrine for generations. The basic idea that technological superiority doesn't guarantee tactical success became a case study taught at military academies worldwide. The importance of using an enemy's weaknesses rather than fighting their strengths became a core part of fighter pilot training. The understanding that even revolutionary weapon systems have weaknesses that can be exploited shaped military planning and buying strategies throughout the Cold War and beyond. The specific tactics developed by American pilots to counter the Me-262's speed advantage, using altitude to build speed in dives, timing attacks for weak flight phases, and constantly patrolling known enemy operating areas, stayed relevant as new generations of fighters with performance advantages appeared. Personal stories from pilots of the time gave rich detail about the psychological and tactical challenges of these fights. Chuck Yeager, in his autobiography and numerous interviews, stressed that destroying the Me-262 required taking exceptional risks and making split-second decisions with incomplete information. He described the tension of waiting near German airfields, knowing that anti-aircraft fire and enemy fighters would attack the moment he did, the calculation needed to time his dive for maximum speed at the critical moment, and the satisfaction of proving that American fighters could beat the seemingly unbeatable jets. Urban Drew, after getting his late recognition in 1983, spoke about the frustration of having his victories denied for nearly 40 years due to a lack of confirming evidence, but also about the importance of the mission, regardless of personal credit. The engineering lessons from Me-262 operations directly influenced the development of the P-80 Shooting Star, America's first operational jet fighter, which entered service just as World War II ended. Lockheed engineers studied captured Me-262s in detail, looking at their engines, airframes, and systems to understand both their successes and failures. The P-80's design included longer-lasting engines with better throttle response, fixing the most critical Me-262 weakness. Improved fuel efficiency extended its range beyond the Me-262's 650-mile maximum. Stronger landing gear reduced the accident rate that troubled German jet operations. Better cockpit visibility improved the pilot's situational awareness during the vulnerable takeoff and landing phases. Soviet designers also studied Me-262 technology, with captured aircraft and engines shipped to research centers where they were thoroughly tested. The information they gathered influenced designs like the MiG-15 and Yak-15, though Soviet engineers also used British engine technology obtained through spying and technology sharing. The global spread of jet fighter knowledge that came from analyzing the Me-262 sped up the switch from piston to jet engines that defined the late 1940s and 1950s. Within 10 years of World War II's end, propeller-driven fighters had become outdated for frontline service, replaced by jets in almost every air force in the world. The final summary of Me-262 operations shows an aircraft that had tactical successes, but was a strategic failure. Individual pilots got impressive kill numbers, and certain missions showed the jet's abilities when conditions were right. However, the overall impact on Allied air operations was tiny. Strategic bombing continued without stopping. Allied fighters kept control of the air, and ground forces advanced into Germany with effective air support all along. The resources put into Me-262 development and production, including rare materials, manufacturing space, and skilled workers, might have produced more conventional fighters that could have been used more effectively with the available fuel and pilot training. The story of German pilots showing off their jets until Mustang aces caught them during weak moments is ultimately a story about the limits of technological fixes for strategic problems. Germany developed the world's first operational jet fighter, a real breakthrough that should have given them significant tactical advantages. Yet this achievement couldn't overcome fundamental disadvantages in numbers, resources, fuel, trained personnel, and strategic position. American and Allied pilots, flying less advanced aircraft but supported by overwhelming industrial power, complete training systems, reliable supplies, and smart tactical doctrine, defeated the technological marvel through persistence, new ideas, and professional skill. In the end, the Me-262 stands as one of aviation history's most interesting what-ifs, an aircraft that showed the future but came too late to change the past. Its combat record, while impressive in certain fights, was ultimately not enough to affect the war's outcome. The American pilots who developed and carried out tactics to counter the jet threat earned their place in aviation history not through technological superiority, but through tactical skill, courage, and a refusal to give up an advantage to a seemingly unbeatable opponent. Their success proved the principle that human factors, including training, doctrine, leadership, and determination, can overcome technological disadvantages when used correctly. The shift from German confidence to Allied dominance in the jet versus Mustang encounters happened in less than a year, from October 1944, when the first Me-262 was shot down, to May 1945, when the last jet operations stopped. This quick change didn't happen because of any single thing, but from the combined effect of systematically exploiting Me-262 weaknesses, along with constant pressure that stopped the Luftwaffe from ever achieving stable jet operations. Every Me-262 destroyed during takeoff or landing was one less available for attacking bombers. Every pilot killed or captured represented irreplaceable experience and training. Every successful Allied attack on jet bases forced German operations to become more scattered and less organized. The final months of Me-262 operations saw German pilots fighting with growing desperation as their tactical situation got worse. Fuel shortages limited flights to only the most critical missions. Engine problems grounded planes for long stretches. Allied fighter patrols made every takeoff and landing potentially deadly. Moving bases disrupted operations and morale. Yet some pilots kept flying combat missions until the war's final hours, showing amazing courage and professionalism despite impossible odds. These men knew they couldn't win but flew anyway, driven by a mix of duty, honor, and hope that their sacrifices might somehow make a difference. The story ended not with a dramatic final battle, but with a slow breakdown as Germany's military structure completely collapsed in early May 1945. Me-262s were left on airfields, pushed into woods to avoid capture, or destroyed by their own pilots and crews to keep them from advancing forces. A few were flown to Allied territory and surrendered. Most just stopped flying as fuel ran out and maintenance became impossible. The jets that had promised to sweep Allied bombers from German skies ended their operational lives scattered across Germany, silent reminders of the gap between technological potential and operational reality. The Mustang pilots who had hunted them returned home as the war ended, their mission done. The jet threat was neutralized through tactics that had proven to be better than technology.